5th of December, 1944. The headquarters of Oberkommando West, Zossen, Germany. Colonel Alexis von Roen, Chief of Intelligence for the Western Front, stands before a colossal map of Europe, whilst 12 German generals observe him in grave silence. Upon the mahogany table lie dossiers containing the profiles of every Allied commander: Bradley, Hodges, Patton. Yet, there is one dossier significantly thicker than all the rest. On the typewritten cover, it reads, Montgomery, Bernard L. Priority Threat Analysis. Von Roen opens the file and begins to read aloud. Methodical. Implacable. Capable of amassing such overwhelming artillery firepower that resistance becomes mathematically impossible. The most dangerous commander in the European theater. What the Germans knew about Monty was something many Americans still struggled to comprehend. He was not the most diplomatic of generals, nor was he the most beloved by his peers, but he was the only one who instilled a cold, paralyzing dread in the Wehrmacht. If you wish to discover why the German General Staff studied one Allied commander with obsessive detail whilst disregarding others, do press that like button. It helps us share forgotten histories such as this. To understand the German fear, one must regress a year or so. November 1943. North Africa and Sicily had already fallen, but the Germans had noted something deeply disturbing in the battle reports. At El Alamein, Montgomery had not merely defeated Rommel, he had dismantled him piece by piece. He had refused to be baited into premature movement. German field commanders sent back reports laced with frustration: Montgomery is immovable. We cannot provoke him. He prepares, he accumulates, and then he crushes. General Wilhelm von Thomar, captured in North Africa and dined by Montgomery himself, was interrogated extensively upon his return regarding British leadership. His assessment of Montgomery was stark: he is the only one who fights war as a science, not a gamble. Preparation, concentration of artillery, absolute certainty. He does not move until he cannot lose. Music swells. This was precisely what terrified the High Command. Patton was a cavalier, he could be lured into a trap. Bradley was competent but cautious. Montgomery, however, was inevitable. The Germans had studied Montgomery's doctrine of the set-piece battle since 1942. They found something deeply unsettling. His principles were the antithesis of the German blitzkrieg. Where the Germans relied on speed and shock, Montgomery relied on the colossal crack, the total annihilation of the enemy's material capability. Steel over flesh. Preparation over opportunity. Attrition over maneuver. There was a critical difference. The German generals were limited by shortages of fuel and ammunition. Montgomery possessed something no German general had in 1944, unlimited artillery shells and the ruthless will to expend them to save British lives. Colonel Oskar Koch, though an American intelligence officer, captured German documents after the war that revealed the Oberkommando's obsession. In an internal memorandum dated 3 August, 1944, barely 2 months after D-Day, a German analyst wrote, Field Marshal Montgomery represents the greatest strategic threat on the Western Front. His capacity to tie down our panzer divisions in a war of attrition is superior to any Allied commander. Recommendation: we must commit our elite SS armor solely to hold his front, or facing him will mean total collapse. This was not paranoia, it was a professional recognition of an enemy who understood the grim mathematics of modern war better than anyone in the Allied camp. In the summer of 1944, the Germans witnessed something that confirmed all their fears. Montgomery executed a strategy that is still debated in military academies, yet remains a masterclass in attrition: the battle for Curren. The numbers are staggering, though often misunderstood. For weeks, Montgomery held the bulk of the German armor, the 1st SS, the 12th SS Hitlerjugend, the Panzer Lehr pinned down around Curren. He absorbed their counterattacks, grinding the flour of the German army into the dust. To put this in perspective, whilst the Americans under Bradley and Patton were able to break out in the south, it was only because Montgomery had acted as a colossal magnet in the north, drawing the German tigers onto his own shield. General Fritz Bayerlein, commander of the Panzer Lehr Division, was interrogated after the war about this period. Music shifts to a somber tone. His testimony is revealing. We could not disengage. Every time we tried to move our tanks to stop the Americans, Montgomery would launch another massive hammer blow. He held us by the throat. It was like fighting a machine that never slept and never made a mistake. But what truly terrified the Germans was not just the material superiority, it was the calculated ruthlessness. Montgomery had a philosophy that contradicted the romantic notion of warfare. He believed a commander should never attack until the logistics guaranteed victory. The battle is won in the mind of the commander before the first shot is fired, he would say. A mistake in planning is a crime against the soldier. This philosophy was the exact opposite of the risk-taking practiced by others. Patton would charge and worry about his flanks later. Montgomery would tidy up the battlefield, ensuring his grip was iron-tight before advancing a single yard. The Germans knew this, and they could do nothing to stop the creeping barrage. General Hasso von Manteuffel, commander of the 5th Panzer Army during the Battle of the Bulge, explained post-war why Montgomery was unique. With other Allied generals, we could hope for a blunder, an overextension we could exploit. Montgomery offered no such openings. Music builds. He fought with a distinct lack of imagination, perhaps, but with a terrifying efficiency. We were forced to bleed ourselves dry against his lines. But the definitive proof of German terror came in December 1944. The Battle of the Bulge, the 16th of December, 1944. 3 German armies, 400,000 soldiers, smashed through the Ardennes in the greatest German offensive on the Western Front. The objective: split the Allies, capture Antwerp, and force a negotiated peace. The German plan relied on chaos. They expected the American command structure to crumble. And initially, it did. The lines shattered. Panic set in. But on the 20th of December, Eisenhower made a decision that the German High Command had dreaded. He transferred command of all Allied forces north of the Bulge, including the American 1st and 9th Armies, to Field Marshal Montgomery. The German reaction was one of dismay. They knew that the chaos they relied upon was about to end. Montgomery did not dash to the rescue like a cavalryman. He did something far more damaging to the German plans. He walked into the headquarters of the American First Army, refused to share the panic, and famously declared he would tidy up the lines. He repositioned troops with cold logic. He abandoned indefensible positions to shorten the line. He brought up the British XXX Corps as a strategic reserve to backstop the Americans. General Alfred Jodl, Chief of Operations at OKW, wrote in his diary, "The northern shoulder has hardened. Montgomery has taken command. The opportunity for a breakthrough there is gone. He has organized the defense with his usual annoying thoroughness." This admission is extraordinary. The Germans, masters of the breakthrough, admitting that the presence of one Englishman had turned their fluid offensive into a static killing zone. But the German respect for Montgomery went beyond his tactical rigidity. Captured documents reveal something deeper. The Wehrmacht High Command maintained psychological profiles of every major Allied commander. The profile for Patton described him as brilliant but erratic, a man who could be delayed by supply shortages. The profile for Bradley, competent, methodical, but lacking strategic flair. The profile for Montgomery was different. It included analyses of his World War I service, his tenure in Palestine, and his destruction of the Afrika Korps. The conclusion of the document was direct. Field Marshal Montgomery is the master of the set-piece battle. He will not be hurried. He will not be distracted. Recommendation: do not engage him in a static battle of attrition, for you will lose. He fights only when he possesses the balance to destroy us. This was not a compliment, music swells, it was a warning. The Germans were telling their own commanders, do not play this man's game. General Gunther Blumentritt, Chief of Staff to the Commander-in-Chief West, was even more direct in his post-war assessment. Montgomery was the anvil against which we were broken. He was the primary threat, from the German point of view, because he denied us the war of movement we excelled at. If you are still watching, you are part of a history that few truly appreciate today. Music. Subscribe so you do not miss the conclusion of how the war ended for these generals. But perhaps the most revealing testimony came from the Desert Fox himself. Before he was forced to commit suicide in October 1944, Field Marshal Erwin Rommel gave his assessment of Allied commanders to his son, Manfred. On Bradley, a solid soldier. On Patton, a bold leader for mobile warfare, frighteningly fast. But on Montgomery, he is the only one who never gave me a chance to recover. He is cautious, yes, but his caution is lethal. He calculates the price of victory and then pays it. He is the enemy I respected most because he defeated me by refusing to fight on my terms. This is extraordinary coming from Rommel, the legendary maneuverist, admitting that the methodical Englishman had bested him by refusing to maneuver until the trap was shut. The irony music is that whilst the Germans feared Montgomery's deliberate crushing power, many in the American command considered him too slow, too arrogant, too British. His vanity and his lectures infuriated Eisenhower and Bradley. But the Germans saw something that many allies could not. They saw a professional soldier who understood that in modern war, the side that makes the fewest mistakes wins. They saw a commander who valued the certainty of victory over the glory of the charge. On the 8th of May, 1945, when Germany surrendered, the captured German officers on Lüneburg Heath had a recurring sentiment. They stood stiffly before the slight, beret-wearing figure of Montgomery to sign the instrument of surrender. They did not ask for Patton. They did not ask for Eisenhower. They surrendered to the man who had chased them from Egypt to the Baltic Sea. General Fritz Bayerlein later summarized the German sentiment in a single phrase during his interrogation: "We could sometimes outmaneuver your other generals." But Montgomery was like a falling wall. You cannot outmaneuver a falling wall. That fear was the greatest compliment an enemy could offer, and it was entirely earned. Bernard Law Montgomery, 1st Viscount Montgomery of Alamein, died in his bed in 1976, aged 88. But in 1944, he was the architect of the Wehrmacht's demise in the West. The German generals who had feared him eventually sent their regards. They had studied him obsessively, and he had earned more than just their fear. He had earned their professional resignation to his victory. Military history will remember Montgomery as many things: a difficult man, music a controversial ego, a cautious strategist. But the Germans remembered him more simply. They remembered him as the only Allied general who forced them to fight a war they could not win. The one who made them realize that no amount of tactical brilliance could stop the methodical, grinding application of overwhelming force. The one who, in the words of von Manteuffel, never gave us a sporting chance. In war, there is no greater compliment than the hopelessness of your enemy, and no Allied commander inspired that sense of inevitability quite like Monty. What do you think of this extraordinary perspective? Did you know the level of professional dread the Germans held for Montgomery's tactics? Leave us a comment and subscribe to our channel. Every week we bring you verified and fascinating stories that changed the course of history. Ring the bell.